All right, guys, thanks for joining me. If you haven't done so, you want to check the website under Home Access Center for your test grade. For the most part, you guys did a really nice job. So congratulations on that. But we are moving on. Like I said, I'm not going to be here tomorrow, so I want to just give you guys a little bit, get you started a little bit into the next chapter, and this all should be a review. So here we go. In the first chapter, we mainly looked at one-dimensional graphs, and we recognize that as our number line with our x, our x-axis. From this point on, we are going to be looking at two-dimensional, even later on three-dimensional graphs. So this looks like your regular good old Cartesian coordinate system, if you remember, with your x being your horizontal axis and your y being your vertical. So this y-axis is our new dimension to make it our two-dimensional graph. So what we're going to do in this section is pretty much just, if I give you an equation, I want you to be able to graph it. Now, one of the easiest ways to graph it is when your equation, any equation is in your slope-intercept form, your y equals mx plus b. Normally, you want to get your dependent variable, or in this case, the y, over on one side and everything else on the other side. It makes it really easy to make a table. You substitute in you pick your independent variable, and then you're going to get your dependent variable, in the end. So this is the best way. So if we look at this equation right here, it's a little tricky because we have this 1/3 out in front. And if you remember, when you graph, which we're going to be doing here in a second, when you graph decimals, it makes it really difficult. And if you're trying to get a nice line, like we are going to get here because this is a linear equation, then it's tough. So definitely be strategic when you pick your values. So when I do that, my favorite one to pick always is 0. So I'll pick 0, and you don't have to start there, but that's just what I'm going to do. It's nice and easy. So I substitute in a 0 for my x, so I get 1/3 times 0 minus 2, and we know that is -2. Now I like to make it nice and neat, so I'm going to get rid of that. I just wanted to show you guys where I'm getting that from. So it's -2. Now when I pick my next x variable, or x value, you want to be very careful. So I want to pick an x that when I divide it out by 3 or multiply it by 1/3, I get an integer, because I do not want to be graphing decimals on my graph. So basically think about what, when you divide it by 3, gives you a nice whole number. Well, the first one I'm going to think of is 3. And it's actually going to be any multiple of 3. So if I have a 3, well, 1/3 times 3 is 1. 1 minus 2, -1. So basically multiples of 3, so here I go, 6. 6 times 1/3, or 6 divided by 3 is 2. 2 minus 2 is 0. Now let's go the other way. Let's go the negative route. If I have a -3, -3 times 1/3 is -1. -1 minus 2, -3. And let's try -6. -6 times 1/3, or -6 divided by 3 is -2. -2 minus 2, -4. Okay? If you notice, 0, -1, that's going nice. A nice little line. So when it's time to graph, and you guys will have graph paper tomorrow, either you'll supply it yourself or I gave the sub graph paper, so just a heads up on that. Then you are going to go ahead and plot your points. So I'm going to start with the first one, 6, 0. So I'm going 6 to the right, and I'm not going up or down any. Now I have +3, -1. There we go. 0, -2, -3, -3, and 6, -4. Okay, so when I look at this, it looks pretty good. Now my line is going to be atrocious just because it is. Not bad. Okay, there we go. So like I said, it's a linear equation. Good thing that we have a line over here. All right, if it wasn't a line, something went wrong. You want to go back and check your table. And this is pretty much what you guys are going to do tomorrow. Now I'm going to toughen it up a little bit and give you some different domain values, but that's all I want you to do. The directions on the worksheet for your homework is going to ask for the domain and the range. Don't worry about that yet. We're going to get into that on Monday. I want to be there and actually be present when I'm teaching it to you. Okay, so moving on. Example 2, so very similar. We have our dependent variable isolated on one side, that's good. We have everything else over here. This time the range that I'm giving you, non-positive reals. Okay, so, and again, we have this decimal that you might want to think, put some value into your x's when you're thinking of them. So, all right, we have our x, we have our y. My favorite to start with always is my 0. So I have my 0. All right, so negative 0.5 times 0 squared is just 0. All right, good. Let's go ahead and think of some negatives. Now, be careful. If I have a negative 1 that I substitute in here, negative 1 squared is 1. 1 times negative a half is negative a half. I do not want to be graphing halves. Unless you guys want to do that, you go nuts, but I don't like doing that. So I'm going to jump to negative 2. Now, negative 2 squared is positive 4. Positive 4 times negative 1/2 is negative 2. Okay, and again, you're noticing odds are not good numbers to substitute in here because of this one, negative 1/2. So I have a negative 4 that I'm going to go ahead and shoot for. If I have a negative 4 squared is 16. 16 times negative 1/2 is negative 8. Okay, and my last one I'm going to have is, let's do negative 6. If I substitute that in, I get negative 6 squared, which is positive 36. Positive 36 times negative 1/2 is negative 18. All right, so let's go to our graph. All right, so I've plotted my points here, and notice how I don't have anything on the positive side of my x-axis, and that's because the domain that I gave you, I told you that not to include that. So here we go. I'm going to connect it, and if you guys remember, because this is x squared, this is a quadratic. When you graph a quadratic equation, you're going to get a parabola. And the negative up here tells you it's opening down, so everything looks good. And there we go. All right, the last one we're going to do tonight is just to show you with an absolute value. All right, so this time I'm giving you a very, very specific domain. So let's go ahead and plot these out. So thinking about your x values to substitute in, it's a little bit less work when I'm giving you this specific of a domain. Now, you could pick any values in between here. In this case, since we're dealing pretty much with our integers, you don't have to worry about putting any decimals in to try to make something come out nicely. So I'm just going to go ahead and start negative 4, negative 3, negative 2, negative 1, 0, 1. Basically every integer from negative 4 to 1. So now if you substitute those values in, let's start with the negative 4. So negative 4 plus 2 is negative 2. The absolute value of negative 2 is 2. 2 minus 3 is negative 1. Moving on. If you go ahead and figure out the rest of your values and then go ahead and graph it, you're going to find that it looks like the familiar V. Remember, absolute value when you graph it has the V shape. And I only went from x is 1 all the way over to x is negative 4. I pretty much stayed in there. So I could even get rid of my arrows here. I went a little crazy. All right. So that's all I care about. And there we go. All right, so to recap, this is what you're going to be doing tomorrow. The first part of class, you're going to work on part 1 of your project from the football field. Basically, you're going to be trying to figure out your inequality. So you might need to use your phone for different resources on the internet. Just obviously only use your phone for math appropriate stuff. And then the second part of class, once you turn that into the sub, you are going to be given a yellow worksheet, which is your homework for the weekend, which there's no reason why you can't finish that in class if you actually work on it. Remember, it's only 1 through 10, and don't worry about the domain and range. And I will see you guys bright and early on Monday morning. Okay, have a great weekend. Bye-bye.